Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 3 of BIOVIA's Next Generation Laboratory Informatics webinar series titled Next Generation Lab Informatics Procedure Execution. I am Kaylee Bach of Labroots, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Today's educational web seminar is presented by Labroots and brought to you by BIOVIA. To learn more, visit 3ds.com/BIOVIA. We encourage you to participate today by submitting any questions you may have during the presentation. To do so, simply type them into the Ask a Question box and click Submit. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation. You may also submit any technical issues here as well if you have trouble seeing or hearing the presentation. And with that, I'd like to now welcome our speaker, Stephen Hayward, Director of Marketing at BIOVIA. For a complete biography on our speaker, please visit the Speaker Biography tab at the left of your screen. Stephen, welcome. You may now begin your presentation.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As mentioned, my name is Stephen Hayward. I'm the Director of Marketing for Lab Informatics at BIOVIA. And so today is the third in our webinar series on Next Generation Lab Informatics. In our first two sessions, we explored the changing landscape for lab informatics across early stage research and into process development. And today we're going to be wrapping up the series by looking at how the latest generation of lab informatics solutions are transforming quality labs, including leveraging lab execution systems, or LES, to help accelerate batch release. So I'm going to start my slides here. As I go, I'm going to turn off my camera just so that you could focus on them. So let's get started. So just to begin, what are the challenges in facing the QC lab? I mean, we all know that labs are under constant pressure to deliver products, analysis, and results demonstrating the performance and quality of the products as quickly and cost efficiently as possible. And in today's labs, still too often there's paper present in one form or another. That may be with the actual procedures in place. It might be associated with the instruments that you're using as well. But then in addition to that, procedures are not always completely standardized across different locations. And that means that the test results might not be completely consistent, or the data might not be comparable. And then at the same time, there's the burden on the analysts in the lab to really make sure that they're using the correct version of a procedure, and of course on lab managers to oversee the life cycle of test procedures as well. The data that you're capturing there has to be gathered and preserved, but that process is not always consistent from one place to the next either. The data isn't standardized across the labs or vertically across the organization, since it can originate from many different sources with different data formats. And then scientists struggle to keep up with the work that's needed, to find the relevant data, and also dealing with all the different informatics solutions used across the lab. And then because of that, the data becomes siloed and hard to access or reuse. And so all of this limits how quickly new products can be, commercialized, slowing time to market and the time to profit for companies. So how do we address this? How do we support the QC lab's specific objectives? Well, let's look at what those objectives are. Obviously, lab is trying to ensure high quality, and that could be supported by cloning and reusing standardized methods, and ensuring consistency between method and data collection. If there are any paper-based approval processes, these can often cause rejections due to incompleteness or errors. The lab's always focused on containing costs, and so we want to do that by trying to reduce physical testing where possible, and automating the testing where we can. And we also can reduce costs by eliminating duplicate testing for things that are reused across various products and ensuring no work is duplicated. We want to use scientists' time effectively, so we try to minimize the waiting times for equipment by focusing on where there are capacity bottlenecks. But you have to sometimes work around the scheduling solutions that you have and the limitations that they impose. So we could focus on that scheduling and load balancing at the lab to retain the focus. We want to minimize the risks. And so how do we do that? Well, we can try and improve compliance through e-signatures and validated systems. And that's something that's been in place for many years now. If you have non-validated computer systems, that requires paper-based processes instead. And so our bottom line is that we're trying to increase the revenue for the company, which we do by having what we usually refer to as a total quality perspective. And that helps us to decrease time to market and increase revenue through all of these aspects. So obviously compliance is a huge driver for QC labs because compliance issues are both a huge drag on resources and a hindrance on getting products to market. If we look at the top citations by the FDA under 21 CFR in the past few years, we could see that QC unit failures are the leading cause of human drug citations over the past few years. The data shows that compliance-related activities consume up to 2/3 of laboratory resources. So the high manual documentation level required for rigorous compliance is quite a significant inhibitor of business productivity. And sample or QC testing, it's a meticulous and highly regulated process. It demands validated environments for development, testing, and production phases. Every aspect of the process is meticulously scrutinized to ensure its integrity and adherence to regulatory guidelines. There are tamper-proof measures implemented throughout the entire life cycle that help safeguard the data and the processes from any unauthorized alterations. It's paramount to achieve right first time execution, and so we emphasize the importance of precision and accuracy from the outset. And so to this end, rigorous validation procedures are conducted at every stage to guarantee the reliability of the testing outcomes. Additionally, we put e-signature change controls protocols in place, and that helps ensure that any modifications undergo a comprehensive review and approval process. And so this unwavering commitment to quality compliance ensures the trustworthiness of the QC testing process. Now, when we think about the scientists in the lab, sometimes they could be faced with almost an overwhelming complexity in their digital lives. For anybody that is familiar with the landscape at your own companies, a map like this probably looks somewhat familiar, because there's often a disconnect in terms of both the informatics systems that are in place in any given lab and the ability for scientists to collaborate both within with colleagues in different departments and different domains. And the workflows between these solutions are just not integrated or continuous, and then the data exchange between them is not automatic, and often requires one-off customizations to make sure that the data doesn't have to be manually transported from one place to another. So it makes it harder to access and reuse data, and it leads to compliance issues if the data can't be located quickly. And of course, there's a higher cost of ownership in supporting all of these different systems. So scientists has to, working in a lab like this, even in any single area here on the bottom axis, has to move between different systems to complete routine work, often taking more time on the computer than they do in the lab work itself. So I want to introduce the solution with which BIOVIA helps increase laboratory efficiency, accuracy, data integrity, and compliance. And that's BIOVIA OneLab. It's a comprehensive solution that has focused capabilities, enabling it to be deployed in labs all across the product development and commercialization lifecycle. It incorporates document and knowledge management, task planning and procedure execution, which we're going to talk about more today, inventory management, and equipment integration and management. And companies leverage it all the way from early stage research labs through to development and then into QA, QC labs, and even into manufacturing because of the overlap between manufacturing and QC labs. Our customers leverage it both in small molecule and biological product development, including in bioprocessing workflows. And in QC labs, OneLab is leveraged for electronic batch record and batch release procedures. And that's where we want to focus today. And I want to give you an example of this, of a customer success with BIOVIA OneLab. And so one of our customers leveraged OneLab in their efforts to automate batch release processes. Their batch release processes were manual and mostly paper-based, and they really had longer review cycles because of this. So that leads to delays in batch release and also heightened compliance risks. And so to address these changes, they implemented a state-of-the-art global lab execution system, which was powered by BIOVIA OneLab. The solution streamlined the batch release process by providing procedural guidance and also enabling direct data capture, giving them better accuracy, precision, and overall efficiency. With OneLab, they implemented automated review by exception, which significantly simplifies the review process, and also help them align then with their objective of achieving instant batch release. And so as a result of these improvements, their labor cost per sample have been reduced by about 10%. So there are 5 main pillars, so to speak, of OneLab, and it's built on a series of focused applications on top of a single data model. And so core to what we're talking about today is the procedure execution layer, or a lab execution system, LES, here on the left. But we also have the capabilities of a LIMS with sample management, tracking, instrument integration and data acquisition, and task management. We have integrated inventory management, as well as equipment management and direct data capture. And then we also have the ELN, which is less prevalent in QC, but can be used as a repository of project work and results. And so with OneLab, analysts in the lab have access to the capabilities of all these different areas without needing to switch back and forth between different software environments or needing to constantly log into different systems. And critically, the scientific workflows are easily configured to match the physical work needed in the lab. And then an analyst can seamlessly move between these areas of OneLab. Whereas with traditional systems, as we saw earlier, they'd be constantly crossing the barriers between them. And then from an organizational standpoint, OneLab enables a consistent model for all of the data captured in the labs, regardless of the workflow or scientific domain. So if we break down the information that we need to either have access to or create in the lab, we have these main types here. And so on the left side, you have sort of this quote, experimental circle, and that it consists of planning out your lab work, executing it by running your test procedures, and then ultimately generating reports. And to be able to do this, you'll call on the resources that are on the right side. And so, there's the practical resources that you need in the lab, the materials and equipment and reagents, and then the recipes and the testing methods that you need to conduct tests. So let's dive into the details here. If we start with the resources and procedures, each bit is a bit specific, so we manage them in these dedicated blocks here. First, we have an inventory to manage the test materials, reagents, and pretty much every stock that you have in the lab. The inventory role is also there to help ensure that health and safety precautions within the test facility are applied according to national and/or international regulations. And then we have the sample management dimension, and that's especially interesting for test materials as it allows you to record the receipt, handling, storage, and disposal of samples and specimens and automatically generate a chain of custody. Our third key component here is equipment management, and that not only involves the equipment definition, but also the retrieval of equipment data, and most importantly, the conduct and handling of metrology events. So having all of this information together allows us to automatically generate exhaustive logbooks and easily identify whether a piece of equipment is fit for purpose when using it for a test. And importantly, that removes a source of paper in the lab, is these equipment logbooks that are often present in different labs. And then finally, we're able to define detailed lab procedures following the S88 standard for procedure authoring. This enables teams to easily standardize and reuse their processes, not only with testing, but in the lab in general, in a consistent manner. Okay, so if we move on now back to our experiment circle, once we've gathered our resources, we are able to start organizing our test activities and request and assign them to specific people or groups, and then monitor their progress. Now, contrary to a typical LIMS that can be exhaustively sample driven sometimes, we're actually also task oriented, which means that you don't necessarily suffer from having to test many samples and handling their tests individually. You could directly execute a single test for many samples at once. So you could plan, request, and assign and execute laboratory tasks so that you could prepare and test batches of solutions and materials. You could calibrate and verify the lab equipment, acquire the analysis data from the equipment, and then monitor your tasks as well. So you can review what the planning of the lab, the scheduling and performance, and collate all the tasks for review, analysis, and reporting. So speaking about executing tests here, in one lab, you have what usually you call the LES, the lab execution system aspect. And in one lab, it's just another dimension, another layer on top. So we have this dimension embedded with the rest, and that strengthens your practices as you can directly check that your resources are fit for purpose when you're testing. Now, the execution is meant to enable mobility with barcode scanning of equipment and materials, and with these automated checks that the equipment and material are suitable for use, from a metrology and expiration perspective. And aside from this, the execution is meant to reduce manual entries as much as possible. So we could perform calculations, retrieve data from other parts of the system, and of course, perform data compliance checks as you go along. This ultimately ends up being available for in a review by exception interface. So the reviewer is able to directly see any exception to the procedure that occurred during execution, as well as the supporting data. And this is one of the main bottlenecks of lab workflows. So being able to apply the concept of review by exception, having attention drawn only to the areas that need attention. For example, was there anything where the values were out of limits? Were there any modifications? Did anyone do any manual entry or make any observations? And then with the test data available at all times to reviewers, it avoids time spent, reviewing every step of the process. And the data is freed up faster so that decisions can be made faster. So let's look into the batch release process in a bit more detail. You could see here, this is a really high-level summary of the batch release process. So you have a set lot of material, and before it can be released from quarantine, you need to attest to the safety, quality, and purity of the material. And that's done from the specification. So we sort of have our personas here, and we'll start with Seth, who initiates the batch testing for the material with the specification in relation to the specific market for the material. Then he goes ahead and associates samples and tests from this manufacturing batch in relation to the specification. Then the work gets assigned to the lab manager, by the lab manager, Marie, and she's going to ensure that the schedules are balanced and equipment is available. Then once we know who's going to carry out the work, so that gets handed over to our analyst, Jane, who will come in and perform the actual tests with the inventory, sample, and equipment information. Afterwards, Marie can review any results, signing off on them once she is satisfied they meet requirements. If she's leveraging review by exception, any results that are within the tolerances are automatically approved. So she only has to manually review outliers. And so that means that, tests released that are within those parameters are basically instantly released. And because this is a batch release workflow, then the output would be a certificate of analysis, which can also be automatically generated. And so that's how customers are accelerating their batch release process by leveraging streamlined workflows without any boundaries between the different systems on a single data model with instant release of results if there's no exceptions. Automation is the key word here, which helps OneLab accelerate batch release. I wanted to talk briefly about another customer success that we've had. So one of our customers is a global biopharmaceutical company, and they successfully implemented OneLab to transform their quality control operations and achieve high-performance lean labs. They replaced paper-based procedures with electronic ones, so they were able to automate data capture, enforced e-signature change controls, and significantly reduced testing time while improving data accuracy. For them, OneLab also optimized inventory management and equipment use, enabling the company to increase the number of samples and new products tested without impacting their resources. The system improved data utilization and knowledge transfer, and also enhanced compliance with regulatory requirements. So as I said, there's a number of underlying focused applications to OneLab, which enable key roles in the lab and transform different parts of lab workflows. And the benefit is that a OneLab deployment can be configured to meet a customer's unique needs, but without custom coding, and can then change over time to address different areas as needs arise or as business priorities change. A smaller company might only be interested in adopting an ELN or upgrading the one they have, but that can become the entry point for a larger digital transformation down the road. Many companies have a LIMS in place, but they're looking to upgrade from an older legacy solution. And so by adopting OneLab for information management in the lab, they can also gain procedure execution capabilities because those two things are really tied closely together in OneLab. And so that leads to more integrated workflows and better data integrity. Companies might often be managing chemical inventory in scratch-built applications, or even just Excel. And so adopting a focused inventory management system by itself can be a game changer. But then the real value multiplier with OneLab is when a company deploys it in one area and then expands it with other capabilities over time. So not only does this tailor deployments to meet specific needs today, but then it enables companies to leverage the investments that they've already made and further expand this unified ecosystem, driving both horizontal and vertical integration through the connected digital lab for true end-to-end digital integration. And so I'll give you one more example of a customer success. And this was at a large global biotechnology leader, where they leveraged OneLab to consolidate different informatics systems that they had in place, including 5 different ELNs and 3 LIMS just across their global process development organization. And so they implemented OneLab in place of those, connected it to a data lake. And the outcome for them was that they were able to triple their process development projects without adding any new headcount. Their scientific and engineering analysis increased in efficiency by 60%. And within the first, 2 years, they realized more than $50 million in annual operation savings just in process development. So OneLab empowers labs to achieve unprecedented levels of productivity, eliminating the delays that arise from manual processes and inefficient data management. It eradicates the time-consuming bottlenecks associated with offline lab tests, manual reviews, data tracing, and batch report compilation. By streamlining these critical workflows, OneLab accelerates the entire testing and release process, enabling labs to deliver results faster and more efficiently. OneLab also upholds the highest standards of compliance and quality, ensuring that lab operations adhere to stringent regulatory requirements, procedural guidelines. It eliminates the risk of human error and ensures consistent adherence to established protocols. So with OneLab, your labs can operate with confidence, knowing that their processes are rigorously controlled and consistently meet the most demanding regulatory requirements. One Lab extends its power, beyond the confines of the lab as well, optimizing material and supply chain operations to help enhance overall efficiency. If you're streamlining logistics and materials management with One Lab, you ensure the availability of critical materials and reagents, minimizing disruptions and delays. It also enables more comprehensive KPI reports and feedback from modeling systems, allowing labs to identify areas for improvement and make data-driven decisions that optimize resource utilization and enhance their overall performance. All of this enhanced agility translates into improved time to market for products, reduced costs, and a competitive edge in your ever-evolving life science industry. With BIOVIA, we're familiar with health regulations in the life science industry, as we've been deploying software in the pharmaceutical industry for decades now. And we do have a culture of compliance in our practices, but also in our applications with standard audit trails and electronic signatures. We also use our own QMS, which is based on industry standards, and our software comes with validation checklists and kits to help our customers planning and performing their validations. We're also committed to providing best practice prepackaged solutions in support of common lab operations. So with packaged solutions, they're intended to simplify and accelerate the project deployment process by eliminating, the defined design, build, and test efforts usually associated with software deployment. So with our packaged solutions, you'll find faster time to value in your deployments and also faster return on investments. And we're leveraging our experience to provide solutions based on our decades of industry experience deploying these best-in-class solutions. You may have seen this compass logo here on the right and a couple of other slides, and that's representative of the business platform that we use across Dassault Systems and within BIOVIA as well. And we're launching One Lab on the 3D Experience platform from Dassault Systems. We've done on-premise installations for many years. We've done cloud-based installations of One Lab as well. And now it's also available on the 3D Experience platform. And we call this the right platform for next generation science. It allows you to collaborate with other scientists and many other people across your organization with many different role-based applications and solutions. It allows you to have the data all in one place with a single data model, and other applications that aren't just focused around the lab can then integrate with the lab data as well. And so the platform is flexible and open. It's not a closed off platform. You can integrate with other solutions using the APIs as well. It's cloud-based, so it's global and scalable as well. And I think that's really important to know because the 3D Experience platform is deployed across many different global data centers. Our BIOVIA solutions are on 5 different data centers at the moment. And it's also able to be, so that means that it's in localizations close to you. So it's not just in a single data center in one country. But it also allows for translation natively within the platform too, so that the applications are right now in 6 different languages. And so it doesn't have to be just in English. So we support localization for our customers all around the world this way as well. If you're not familiar with the 3D Experience platform, I'll give you just a really quick tour. So here on the top left, you've got the 3D compass. And so that gives you the access to the different role-based solutions that any scientist would have. And again, this can be configured for different personas within your lab, so different types of users. They would get assigned to different roles, and then you'd see the apps that they have available to them. You can have a feed reader in here so that you can have regular updates to things that are going on within your organization or pulling things in from the web as well. At the top, something that's really important for us is social collaboration through communities on the platform as well. We call this 3D Swim. Swim stands for See What You Mean. So it's a very visually focused communication platform. In some ways, it's like Facebook for scientists. It's right here on the platform. But it ties into the data as well. And so you can link to the projects, you can link to the data, you can link to the applications that you're using in the lab too. We have 3D search at the top, so it allows you to search over the entire platform, anything that you have access to. You can also focus it down to only the applications that you're using in time. And then we have even more specific scientific searches available within our lab solutions as well. And there's a 3D Drive application too that allows you to store data directly on this platform in a file folder structure and access things that way too. So it's all in one place. The solutions that are on this platform are offering an improved user experience. So it's easy to access your apps and move between them. But the other thing that we're doing here is that we're building the solutions on top of a graphical relationship data format model. And so that's something that's used by leading companies all around the world, something that's more scalable and flexible than a traditional database model. And it also allows us to really parameterize the data in that you're capturing from the labs, even more so than you would normally be able to do in, where you're capturing structured data. So when you're capturing unstructured data, we leverage things like materials recognition and smart text of the different things that you're typing into there. So you can see here an example of an experiment where you can sort of parameterize all the different pieces of it. And even if you're just typing that in a free text format, the system can recognize that and make it into a smart text object, and then start to link these things together in the RDF graphical database underneath the hood. And that means that your data is already in a format that you can start to leverage data science techniques on top as well. We have a transition strategy from moving customers from their existing installations. So if you're using one lab already and you want to move onto the 3D Experience platform, it's actually the same code base. So the data format is same from one place to another, and the applications are very, very similar. So there's not a huge effort changing there. If you're moving from, say a BIOVIA workbook ELN or other third-party ELNs, and you need to have a place to store and view all of that data, we have something that collects and indexes the data and makes it available in the ELN on 3D Experience platform on Scientific Notebook. So you can collate all the data in one place, you can view it all there, you can view PDF reports, or you can click back and open up the native app if you still have access to it as well. So that gives you one place to consolidate all of the information in one location on one platform. I want to talk just a little bit about deployment onto the cloud before I wrap up here, because I think that a lot of people are aware of the trend of moving to the cloud and why it enables greater flexibility. But it's also important to realize that it can help reduce your total cost of ownership, right? Because when you're dealing with an on-premise installation of software, not only do you have the licenses, but you have any customization, the support of the hardware, your IT personnel, and your ongoing maintenance issues. So there's a lot of ongoing costs to support an on-premise installation. When you move to the cloud, basically you're responsible for the initial configuration and then the annual licensing costs and training and things like that. But all of this infrastructure maintenance gets offloaded onto the cloud vendor. And so that can help reduce your capital and operating budget for your IT systems by up to 80%. So it can be really, really important for customers to move to the cloud just from a budgetary perspective. It also helps, reduce the burden and IT costs because as I was saying, you see all of these on-premise responsibilities of the customer. And when you move to the cloud, it's even, you could see it's more detailed than even in the previous slide. So that's offloading a lot of things onto your cloud vendor. But then in addition to that, we're talking about things that are in validated environments, right? And so if we look at a traditional validation procedure, when you start out before the deployment, you have the customer doing the user requirements and specifications. Then the vendor configures the software. So they are doing it with the product requirement specification and system requirements specification. And then a lot of the qualification efforts are the responsibility of both the vendor and the customer here on the right. So these are the things that are colored in gray. And so that's what takes a long time. Every time, not just the initial deployment, but every time there's an upgrade in the system, this has to be done again. When you move into the cloud, you're again offloading a lot of that responsibility onto the cloud vendor. So for us, we're taking over all of these items here in blue with our cloud deployments. And we also speed that up through a lot of automation in our testing procedures just to do the qualifications before we deliver it to the customer. So then at the end, the customer is just responsible for the final performance qualification along with BIOVIA. So this really speeds up your validation procedures and can get you through these upgrades a lot faster. So I'm just going to sum things up here with BIOVIA OneLab, which we consider your home for science. It really does help transform scientific workflows, increasing lab efficiency and compliance. It can help reduce your errors in the lab by up to 80%. So that really helps ensure that your results are right first time and that you've got increased data accuracy. You can release your batches up to 40% faster. Through the things that we talked about, streamlining that procedure execution and also the automated review by exception. I think we talked early on about removing the barriers between traditional points systems like ELN, LIMS, and LES, as you have more seamless workflows for your scientists in the lab, which is really important for them, right? They don't necessarily care about the solutions that are in place or what they're called or how much they cost. It's just that they want to go into the lab and be able to do their work and have a solution that follows them around and matches what they're doing. And it's also really, really important to create fair data in the lab, right? So data that's findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. That's a big trend recently in using this term. And so with OneLab, you can do that, right? Because we're creating the data in a standardized format, making it accessible to people, it's reusable, and you can find it with all the context that was there originally as well. So with that, I'm going to stop talking briefly here and open things up to questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Stephen, for your informative presentation. We will now start the live Q&A portion of the webinar. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask, please do so now. Just click on the Ask a Question box located on the far left of your screen, and we'll answer as many of your questions as we have time for. All right, so let's get started. We've already got some great questions coming in here. Excuse me. Okay, this first question, Stephen asks, how do you connect on-premises instruments with cloud deployments?
Okay, that's an interesting question. It's a good one as well, because obviously there are firewalls in place to protect between unauthorized access from things that are outside of your network, right? And with the cloud deployment of OneLab, that's not is sitting on your network. And so we actually have a specific application that we call integration gateway, and it's used for this purpose. And so that forms a connection between your on-premise instrument network and then a cloud deployment of OneLab. And so this creates a client gateway and a server gateway that are specific to each deployment and then are uniquely paired together. So a customer would deploy the client gateway on their network, and all communication gets initiated on the client side and then connects to the server gateway and forms a bridge for things like Task Planner within OneLab. It uses a standard SSL connection to create the bridge. And then from that point forward, OneLab basically acts like it's on premise in terms of connection to the instruments, but it's never asking to be on the customer network. So it's configured from inside the network first.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. And feel free to come back on camera with me if you'd like. This next question for you asks, do you use proprietary data format?
No, we don't. So we don't use a proprietary data format. Our approach with OneLab is that the data that you captured gets parsed into a standardized format. And so you define, the taxonomy and the ontology that you're going to be using. And then that makes things consistent across the lab so that you don't have, differences in how temperatures or pHs are labeled or anything that's more complicated than that. We've worked with the Allotrope Foundation and the Pistoia Alliance. And so, our customers tend to deploy data formats that look like that are either ADF or something similar to it, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in that format. It's just important that our customer defines what their ontology is going to be like. And we have stuff within OneLab that's already kind of prepackaged and able to get you up and running like that. And then it's not locked into that format. You can export the data as well. You can use it. You can transform it into different formats. We have a hugely powerful solution called BIOVIA Pipeline Pilot that helps do that as well. And so, yeah, it's not a proprietary data format. It's just something that's standardized and configured by each customer, again, without custom coding.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stephen. We have time for a few more questions here, so we'll continue. This next question asks, what type of instrument data formats do you support?
Sometimes it's easier to say what types of instrument data formats we don't support, but we have a huge list. I think I have a slide here for this as well. So there's a bigger list than this that has all of like the data formats in it. And so it's most common instruments in the lab, if they output some sort of standardized file format that you can grab and connect to, we've probably parsed it at one point or another. And if not, we have sort of prepackaged parsing, or parsers that you can leverage as well to build one customized for your needs. But we have this list here of the parsers that we sort of already have in place, and it just means that almost any instrument that you're going to encounter in the lab, we've probably built a parser already for it, and then you can use that to standardize the data into OneLab.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. We have time for one more question here, so we'll wrap up after this one. And this question asks, how does OneLab integrate with existing systems?
Sure, that's a really good question. Because OneLab has the ability to work with many other systems in the lab, whether that's your ELN, LIMS, data lake for storage, or something else. So we do that through open API protocols. So you can make sure that all of your systems are working together as well as possible, and that you can configure the flow of data between them, right? And we can also leverage, as I mentioned, BIOVIA Pipeline Pilot. That helps to connect different data sources together and then streamline the workflows between different systems. But we recognize that most customers are not interested in ripping out all of their informatics systems at one point and replacing most of them with OneLab, at least not all in one go. And so that's why we built it, that it can be something that can be configured for specific workflows and integrate with other systems. So pulling and pushing data where necessary, standardizing it, and making sure that it's as seamless as possible with other systems that are in place already. And that's something that when I talked earlier about the one customer who implemented lab execution system with one lab. And they were doing that on top of a LIMS that they had in place already. But then for the scientists in the QC lab, that's basically they were just interacting with one lab, right? That's all they needed in their day-to-day testing regimens. And then a lot of the other information was automatically pushed into the LIMS from there.
Fantastic. All right, well, great. Thank you so much, Stephen, again, for your time today. Do you have any final comments before we go?
No, I think I've said as much as I possibly can, but I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for joining us. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to chat with you about this.
Great. Well, thank you again, Stephen, for your time today and your important research. We would also like to thank Labroots and our sponsor, BIOVIA, for underwriting today's educational webcast. Before we go, I'd like to thank the audience for joining us today and for their interesting questions. Questions we did not have time for today and those submitted during the on-demand period will be addressed by our speaker via the contact information you provided at the time of registration. This webcast can be viewed on demand and Labroots will alert you via email when it's available for replay. We encourage you to share that email with your colleagues who may have missed today's live event. You will now be redirected to the registration page where you can find parts 1 and 2 of our webinar series. Just click on their title to register and watch on demand. So until next time, take care, everyone. Goodbye.